I think at the end of the day, when it comes to the pelvic area, is just, I mean, obviously it's a little bit easier for us to dissect because we know the human body better. But when it comes to our clients and servicing our clients, I think at the end of the day, we hit the nail on the head in terms of just like meeting yourself and meeting your clients where you're at. I think a lot of times, Dylan, you and I are definitely more of like the personal training side of things. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of our clients, we can relate to our clients in the fact that a lot of these changes aren't going to happen overnight. They're just not. And so when it comes to fixing these, we'll say issues or deficiencies, however you want to word them, the biggest thing is just to be patient. Like yeah, you're going to feel instant relief if your hip flexors are extremely tight. It's going to help you squat better. But over time is where, like we kind of related it back to with consistency and discipline. If you're consistent with your stretches and your discipline in terms of when it comes with your training and so on, that's where the long lasting changes are going to be. And that's where I think a lot of people get hung up when it comes to bodybuilding or sport performance. And that's where I think the biggest issue comes from. Like everyone just wants the quick fix, the quick, we'll say, get rich pill. And that's just not the case. Like you didn't have the type of body and the type of physique that you have now, Dylan, whenever you started 17, 16, 17, 18.
Right. Yeah.
Weren't putting up the numbers that we are now when we first started or even halfway through. It's the long game. And that's where I think what we're doing and what we provide as coaches is that's like the wisdom that we have. It's like, look, chill out, take it one day at a time. Don't try and hit a home run with the first pitch. Like,
right.
Get your reps up there, get your reps in. And then, yeah, eventually over time, like if you have hip issues and you stay with it, like you're going to one day feel like, holy shit, I don't have hip issues anymore. I don't have tight hips or whatever it might be. And then you're going to be like, oh, holy cow. Like it's only been 2 months that I've been doing my stretches and my activation every day. Wow. That really isn't that long, but when you do them every day, it feels like, gosh, like this isn't going anywhere. And then one day it comes out, okay, wow, I am better.
Muscles that go into the pelvis, the pelvis is it's just your hip. It's the bony structure that holds it all together. And there's a lot of muscles that are going to contribute to that movement. So like an anterior tilt, a posterior tilt. So I'll just kind of go into a little bit about like an anterior and posterior pelvic tilt. So like your anterior pelvic tilt is typically the problem that most people I see have. And that's also kind of normal to have a little bit of an anterior tilt, but I think most people have an increased anterior tilt at the pelvis. And the muscles responsible for that is your hip flexors, which is going to be like your iliopsoas, your rectus femoris, your TFL, and then your erector spinae muscles are going to be kind of responsible for that. We can go into like some exercises and kind of stuff that go into that a little bit later. And then your posterior pelvic tilt is going to be another force couple, which is like your rectus abdominis, so your abs, your external obliques, and your glutes and hamstrings. So those would be responsible if you have a posterior pelvic tilt, which means your pelvis is tilted backwards instead of forwards. And we can get into more things with that.
Yeah. Too. What kind of symptoms do you think most people would notice if they had an anterior pelvic tilt versus a posterior pelvic tilt?
Yeah, so like that anterior one is usually what people have. That's going to be because like your glutes are weak and they're not firing properly. So then your hamstrings and your adductors are going to pick up the slack. And so that's usually when you get like hamstring pulls, your hamstrings usually hurt. Feels like you have a pulled groin maybe. And that's usually like if you're doing deadlifts, you're going to like get into too much extension at the end because you can't bend backwards into back extension. So you're going to see like an excessive like lockout when you're doing deadlifts. Typically just because your glutes are weak is the biggest part of that anterior pelvic tilt.
And that's so that you shift that tension from your glutes into your lower back to compensate, right?
Right. And because your glutes are so big, if those are weak, those small muscles in your back, like your QL or your performance, those are going to start taking over. And that's when you're going to have that lower back pain, is because these small muscles in your back are taking over because those big muscles are weak.
Ah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. So what specifically can we do then for those people who notice those symptoms and who suffer from that? What can we do? Or what are they doing at the gym, maybe, or what can they do at the gyms to prevent this, to prime their body to be able to work better, work more efficiently, right? To get those big muscles to turn on and allow those little muscles to stabilize, do their job, but ultimately release a little bit of that tension.
So I mean, Josh can talk about what he does too, but typically what I would do for an anterior pelvic tilt is you definitely want to strengthen your abs, get that core tight, and then just work on those glutes. So like doing some glute ham raises, RDLs are going to be important for that, to stretch the hamstrings and strengthen the glutes. And then like we talked about, like glute bridges, all those are important. Josh can kind of talk about what he does too for that type of stuff.
Yeah. So, I mean, Dusty basically nailed it right on. I mean, I do an assessment for all my clients, so I have a pretty good idea of whether or not they have like a more of an anterior or a posterior pelvic tilt. But like Dusty said, 90% of the time, if someone's going to be tight in terms of anterior or posterior, like they're going to be more anterior, in which case, if I see that, Dusty hit it on the head. I'm going to make sure I'm programming or getting plenty of abdominal work, whether it's through proper bracing techniques, big bang for our buck movements, or if I'm going to isolate the abs. So ab crunches, ab rollouts, internal, external obliques. But then also I'm going to make sure that I stretch their hip flexors. So within reason, I want to stretch the hip flexors. I want to make sure the quads are tight because those are going to work in unison. And then exactly like Dusty said as well, make sure the hamstrings are getting stronger and make sure the glutes. Dusty could also probably tell you more about this. Dusty, would the QL also affect posterior versus anterior pelvic tilt if it is weak and or tight?
Honestly, anytime that you have an excessive anterior or posterior, the QL typically is going to take over a lot. So you'll see that in honestly both.
Okay, so yeah. In that case, I'll do some like Swiss ball side bends or like a Swiss ball side stretch, depending on like if I know my client sits at a desk a lot or sits in a chair or something like that. But I mean, I don't think it's super complicated in terms of what you need to do. But also we are health professionals, we are fitness professionals. So what's common and what makes sense for us in terms of if you're tight up front and you got an anterior pelvic tilt, you want to stretch those to loosen them up. And then as you regain that a little bit more range of motion, you're going to want to make sure that you're now strengthening the glutes, the hamstrings, your low back, your QL, erector spinae, those muscles to keep that new orientation of the pelvis where we want it to be rather than going back every time.
That's so huge. You got to make sure that we're working to build that balance. Like this is arguably the only time where balance is really, really optimal and efficient, right? Sometimes, and a lot of times people want balance in life where that really doesn't happen quite as much as we'd like. But for the body specifically, when we're talking about posture, it works off that push-pull to balance itself. So like they're saying here, if you have that forward tilt, things are pulling forward or pulling backwards too far, that means there's a break in the chain. Something's wrong. So we're being off balance in a sense. So I love that. Making sure you stretch the part where you're tight, and then make sure you strengthen the opposite side. It is black and white. It is very simple. And I don't believe it's just because we're in this life all 24/7, 365. I think it's more than that. I think it's more of the discipline factor, right? It's the discipline to do the work that we know we need to do day in and day out, because consistency, and I'm sure you guys can agree, is the only way you're going to solve these problems. You can't do it for a day or two and then just expect things to be fixed after not doing it then for the rest of the week. You got to stay consistent. You got to do this day in and day out, or even focus on the week and do things on a set schedule every single week. That way you can start to see that progress. You can start to really see that increase in strength. And not only that, but your posture is going to feel a whole lot better and look a whole lot better too. And when you have a change in posture, you have a change in just your overall body function. And not just that, but the way you think as well. It all is connected here. So this is yes, how to solve your lower back issue, but ultimately this is really going to help you just turn the stone for many other things in your life. You build discipline in one area, guys, you're going to build discipline in every area of your life. So that's huge. That's huge, guys. Make sure you understand that and hit on that. All right, awesome, guys. Thanks for that knowledge. So what good exercises can we move into for priming the body before workouts? Let's say it's leg day and we want to make sure that our hips we're sitting in that anterior pelvic tilt because we sit too much at work, you know? So we want to make sure everything is loosened up, is firing how it should be. What are some good exercises besides planks? We talked about those already. Is there in glute bridges as well? Are there any other good exercises that you guys would throw in your mix?
Things that I'll typically do like in the clinic is we usually do like a dynamic warm up first. So just get the whole body moving, get the blood flowing, and then we'll get into like the glute bridges and the planks, getting the abdominal, get your abs engaged, and then we'll move on to like our big exercises.
Yeah, it's cool. Getting the abs engaged. That's key, guys. If you see a common theme, it's always about the core. It's always about your midsection, not necessarily your core. That's part of it, but more midsection, right? Getting everything tight and stabilized. Josh, do you have anything to add in that?
Yeah, piggybacking off of what Dusty said, I think for all of our listeners, a really good way to think about a dynamic warm up is with not because it was taught to me, but I like to use the RAMP principle, RAMP, which stands for raise your body temperature. So you're going to be doing your typical dynamic warm up. Then you're going to want to activate muscles. So in this case, for a leg day, you're going to want to activate your core, your glutes, your hamstrings. And then you want to mobilize the joint or the major joints that you're going to be working in that workout. In this case, it's predominantly going to be the hips and the pelvis area. So you're going to want to stretch your hip flexors. You're going to want to stretch your adductors, your abductors, your groin. And then if this is more of like an athlete, then I would potentiate them. So maybe I would start with like some just really low end box jumps or plyo body weight jumps. But if it's like a general population, then I would just stick with the RAM part, the raise, the activate, and the mobilize. And then using that, you're basically going to cover all ends of the spectrum in terms of, did you activate the things and get your body warmed up? Yes. Did you mobilize the proper joints and the proper muscles that we need to stretch out? Yes. And did we activate the primary muscles that are going to be working when we do our squats, our deadlifts, our lunges, whatever it might be? Yes. So I found a pretty foolproof way just to cover all ends, however you want to do it. In what order? Does it really matter? Technically, no, but you probably want to start with getting the entire body loose, raising your body temperature. And then if you want to mobilize before you activate, that's entirely your prerogative, your choice.
I like that. I like that a lot. That's a good one. So raising body temperature could be through like walking a treadmill, right? Or sitting in the sauna. However you want, right? Whatever works. Man, I know I try to raise my heart rate and have an Apple Watch just for that, to read that. If you have one of those, that's so key. Definitely utilize that Apple Watch just to see where your heart rate is before you get into that workout. But this is so key, guys, because you got to make sure, one, that you warm up, because what it's going to do is going to help you prevent injury. Huge right there. That's the winner. That's going to make sure that, one, your body's optimal, you can do everything safely, and two, you can actually do what you're trying to do. You know, you don't want to have limited range of motion going into these heavy lifts. It's just not going to end well for you. You're not going to get much out of it as well. So that's why we warm up. A lot of people neglect that, but I say it is one of the most important, one of them, factors of working out. That's killer, guys. So how about then when you're in the movement, when you're right there, when you're thinking about squat, all right, let's say, what is the optimal way to really set your body up?
Um, I'll just kind of start and we can go from there, but it's definitely gonna be dependent on your body because everyone's body is a little bit different.
Yeah.
I mean, it's gonna be based on your femur, so your leg bone. You could be retroverted, which means that your feet kind of point outwards, and that's just your normal stance. Or
Mm.
you could be anteverted, which means your feet point inwards, and that's your normal stance. Because I see people kind of watch videos and the person's feet are perfectly straight forward, so they try to mimic that. But if your body naturally sits with your feet outward, then it's okay to kind of move your legs out a little bit, place your feet a little bit further out, and squat like that. So it's
Mm.
definitely going to be dependent upon your body too.
Mm. Yeah, that's huge. So analyze yourself, see how things are, and know that. Also, just to add to that as well, know that how you are currently isn't going to be how you are going to end up. As you train more and more, your body's going to change and adapt a little bit more. So you're working towards that perfect optimal body. So we work with what you have, analyze where you are right now, so you can then grow off that, improve off of that.
I think Dusty really hit the nail on the head. I mean, from a I'm not a physical therapist, so I don't know in terms of what Dusty does or how he goes about certain things. Like you said, if you're more duck-footed, my job, if I get you as an athlete, is to work with you where you're at. Obviously, if I had my perfect human being and I could customize my human being, yeah, I'd be able to squat you toes pointed perfectly forward. We could squat you all the way down to the ground and um, all of that. But at the same time, my job is to work with you again where you're at. I gotta figure out where you're at, figure out how to get you to where I want you to be, and then slowly progress you to the point of where, like I said, we want you to be optimal functionality.
Yeah. Mm. I like what you said there. You said you highlighted over depth, how far you can go down. I want to highlight over that. I want to look at that real quick. So I know a lot of people talk about you got to go ass to grass, you got to get low. And for standing from a bodybuilding point of view, that's not always the best way to build muscle. It sometimes, depending on your mobility, if you go all the way low, you're shifting tension from your quads where you want to keep it, because more tension in a working muscle is going to produce more strength gains, more muscle gains. But so if you're shifting tension throughout the movement, you're losing that effort, you're losing that growth. So I know for bodybuilding specifically, you want to maintain your active range of motion, however, whatever that may be. Typically, that's about when you're hitting 90 degrees, maybe a little bit lower if your mobility is good, if you work towards it, maybe a little bit higher if you're just starting out, if you're really tight. So you got to work with that. As Josh and Dusty were saying, start where you're at, right? Meet yourself where you're at currently, and then improve and work off that. Now, if your goal is to build muscle, right, then you want to maintain that active range of motion. The range of motion where your muscle mass, where the working muscle can maintain the most amount of tension, right, throughout the whole entire strength curve, throughout the eccentric and the concentric. So when you're building strength, though, when you're focused in on improving the numbers, rather, it doesn't matter as much how far how perfect your form is, right? You want to go a little bit lower. What would you guys say about that? What's your input?
I think that again, depending on how I think a lot of it comes down to what your goal is. What is your goal? What are you trying to emphasize in terms of um like again, what you do for bodybuilding is probably going to be a little bit different than what you do for sport performance related. Bodybuilding is much more physique driven. Obviously, you got to make sure that all four parts of your quads are equally symmetrical, the same size, the same striation. The judges are going to pick that apart. Whereas with sport performance or maybe for rehabilitation, we might not focus as much on quads because that's not the primary builder. I mean, if it comes to sport performance, if you look at, I train a bunch of football players. Do I want my football players to have big legs? Yeah, ideally, but I'm going to focus more on glutes and hamstrings because they're constantly running. They're constantly cutting. That's the power muscle of our body. Our glutes are the biggest muscle in the lower body. So therefore, I'm going to shift my focus more towards that rather than quads. And that's where I think what we're doing here is, again, we're taking what your goal is, what your passion is, and what you want to do, and then tailor the programming and tailor the coaching principles to however you want to do it. If I have a client that can't go, we'll say, ask the grass, I'm not going to force you to go down, ask the grass. Yeah. There's no point. If you have great range of motion and you can do that, and you're a bodybuilder and we can emphasize your quads, yeah, then that's great.
Yeah. Amen. Amen. Wherever you're at, whatever your goal is, we got to focus on that. That's good. And Dusty, how about physical therapy? What would you say?
Yeah, so we typically we'll try to keep, if we're talking about like depth, we'll try to keep them in that like 90 to 110 degree range. We don't really go past that, because then you're going to be working on like some hamstring concentric control, which typically our focus, you want to hit the quads. And once you get to 90, you're then doing that eccentrics of your quads, and then you're coming back up and you're going to be doing the concentric of your quads. Obviously your glutes too, hamstrings are being worked, but we usually typically stay right around that 90 range also.
Yeah.
Once you start getting below that, I mean, you can definitely injure yourself. I've talked about this a little bit before, but like, I know a lot of people have also like tight calves. So they squat and they can't squat as low because they feel like they're going to start falling backwards. So like one thing that you can do, like where you're at right now, you can just put a small weight under the back of your heels. So you're still able to squat, you're able to get down a little deeper, but then your focus then is going to be really stretching your calves. You can just do that incline stretch where, you put your feet up on an incline, pull yourself forward and really stretch those calves. So then they're not as tight. And then eventually you should be able to just take those weights out from underneath your feet.
That's key. That's huge. Yeah, I see a lot of people doing that in the gym, and that is absolutely great. Exactly what Dusty said. It's going to give you that extra range of motion, almost like a kind of like a helper in a way. And then it's going to help you increase that mobility in your ankle joint, because that is so key as well. A lot of times, if you're trying to go as low as you can to get depth, and you're trying to build strength and build muscle mass, and if your ankles are super tight, your knees can only go so far then, because your ankles are going to lock up, your knees are going to lock up, and then the only thing left to move is your pelvis and then your lower back. Once that meets its end mark. So that's where you're getting a lot of your lower back issues as well. You're shifting that tension and it's causing more harm than good. So you want to make sure, I feel like the best way, or one of the best ways to really solve this problem is, one, control the eccentric, control that slow stretch. Make sure that you're not just dropping down, but you're controlling it. You're feeling the muscles work. You're feeling and controlling everything. I always tell my clients this, you should always be able to stop on a dime at any point in the range of motion, especially for squats, excuse me. You should be able to really control your quads and to really stabilize and hold any position. If I were to say stop, whenever you're doing the range of motion, whenever you're doing the exercise. So that's a key thing to work towards as well. A big thing where people kind of neglect or maybe overlook is they think the concentric, when you're fully contracting and fully shortening a muscle, is where you're really going to break it down the most. But studies show now that eccentric, that stretch, is where you're really going to cause a lot of tension into the muscle mass and cause a lot more growth from the eccentric, from controlling that stretch. So making sure you have that control is going to be, one, something to work towards, and two, something to really focus and master on. That's another key point to all this, guys. Once you can, I've found in myself, and I've found with watching my clients as well do this, that before, when they start and they have these tight, upper body, tight hips, tight back, their range of motion, their mobility isn't quite the best. But as they go through this control, as they implement tempo training, which we teach you more in fast mass bodybuilding, they really start to gain that control back. They start to gain that mobility back. They're able to stop on a dime whenever they want, whenever they can. And that only gives them more control over their muscles, over their body. It's more mindfulness and more mindful control. So that's going to help you build so much more muscle. And it's also going to fix and help solve these mobility issues. You're going to start to stretch out the muscle, get more blood into that muscle, going to cause more growth, more recovery, and more healing from that as well, which is exactly the whole process in order to get muscle growth. So big factor here, guys, control the eccentric. That pretty much sums up all the pelvic area and how to improve on that. So I hope you guys learned some great knowledge today. The biggest thing that I want to say is thank you guys for joining us tonight, and we will see you on next week's call as well. Great, guys. So that's all the time we got tonight. Thank you guys for joining us today, Dusty. I appreciate you, my man. Thank you for the drop of some knowledge. We are going to close it out tonight, but next week we're going to come back on Tuesday night to talk more about mechanics of movement, how to increase your performance, make your body more optimal, and ultimately build more muscle and burn more fat. And thank you, guys. This is Fast Mass Bodybuilding. We are here to help you build the body of your dreams.
Can't nobody out here do it like me. Ain't nobody out here winning like me. Can't nobody